Hello, everybody. Welcome to DevCentral Connects. I am Jason Rahm, your host, and my partner in crime, John Wagnon, is not able to join us today. He's enjoying some R&R down in the great state of Arkansas, or as they say down there, Woo Pig Sioux, Arkansas. But I do have today with me Pasilva himself, co-hosting. Peter, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Jason. You know, you guys do such a fantastic, seriously, a fantastic job on the show. So it's kind of fun and honor. We're live. Thanks for having me. We were sort of joking, right? The backup, the understudy, finally gets his chance live.
Well, you are the one with all the theater and drama background and stuff. So I bow to your expertise for sure. Yeah.
So, Wagnon, in his honor, in fact, he sent us a note, everyone, right a little bit before the show started, wishing us luck. So, this show is definitely in his heart. But he often starts with kind of this question of the day, and it's usually the Earth's most pressing questions and wonders, like crunchy or creamy peanut butter. I'm a crunchy guy. The polarizing Star Wars versus Star Trek, that one. We had security on last week. As a teaser, we have another security person on this week. So kind of this thought about risks and threats. And I thought of maybe tossing out how you felt if there was a difference, because I think there's a difference between risk and threats, even though they might be used interchangeably within information security and those sorts of things. But more importantly, the question is, as you've gotten older, are you more or less risk averse? So I'll just say for me, as I've gotten older, there are definitely things where I'm like, oh, no, I ain't gonna try that just because, fear of something or plane falling out the sky or things like that. So for you, are you more risk averse as you get older, or are you more as the days go by and you're like, oh, I'm getting older, I got to at least jump out of a plane once?
Yeah, I think I got all of my risk taking out in my childhood. My mom, my poor mom, she actually was questioned for child abuse at the hospital just because I hurt myself so often doing dumb little boy things. And so, I got all my risks taken out early. And so, yeah, as I get older, definitely I'm far more risk averse, especially physically. It's like I have a 2-story house, and in the back it's 3-story. And, it's like, yeah, I could go up and hammer some tiles in, but I'm more than happy to pay the 20-year-old $150 to climb up there and nail on some tiles when they fly off. So totally, for me, risk averse.
Yep, I'm the same way, especially hanging the Christmas lights. So this week is a kind of cool. We had F5 Labs on last week, Ray Pon, and this week we're kind of honored to have the F5 Security Incident Response Team on. So SIRT assists customers with security incidents in real time on the front lines, protecting you against security breaches. And they see all sorts of attacks, both against the F5 devices and the services they protect on the back end. So they mitigate, they protect businesses, block unauthorized access, help you recover quickly from disruptions and denial of services. And I'd like to bring on, since we talked threat intelligence last week with Ray, Aaron Brailsford, who's I think you're senior security engineer with the SIRT team?
That is right. Yep, senior security engineer over here in the F5 SIRT.
Cool. And you're a longtime F5er, Aaron, in our support organization. So you've seen your fair share of both networking and application issues, huh?
Oh, yeah. I've been here for, nearly 15 years now. So
wow. So what about yourself? As you've gotten older, live some life, are you more or less risk averse? Do you want to take those chances because the days are numbered, or are you more like, I'll go another day without a broken ankle?
Oh, I think I'm less risk averse.
Oh.
Don't get me wrong, there is some stuff that I still won't do, like climb up on the roof. because I am terrified of heights. But my fiance keeps telling me that she's going to make me jump out of a plane after we get married. So I guess that's going to happen, which I never would have done a decade ago.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I'm getting less risk averse.
All right. Well, it's two non-riskers and one let's go for it. So can you welcome to the show, by the way. It's great seeing you, Aaron. Can you tell our friends a little bit about the security incident response team and how you guys help our customers?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are a global team. There's probably 80 to 90 engineers worldwide in our support org. And then we have a smaller team of people like myself who are dedicated security engineers, 7 of us worldwide spread around the world. And we do 2 things primarily. We help customers who phone in who are under attack, and we help them mitigate the attack as quickly as possible in the most expedient manner possible. And our job is to stop the bleeding, basically, and make the pain go away in the short term, and then give them advice for the long term. Mm-hmm. The other thing we do that's very important to the company and the industry in general is vulnerability management. So we deal with all of the external researchers who report problems with our products or with our infrastructure. And we deal with disclosing those vulnerabilities, making sure they get fixed in as timely a manner as possible. And then publishing the security advisories on Ask F5.
And then does that also include, things like generating a CVSS and a CVE score and such? Yeah,
so we work with our product development teams and our platform security team within PD to generate the CVSS score, to score the severity and the vector of the vulnerability. We, F5, are a CNA, a certificate numbering authority. So we get to assign our own CVE numbers to vulnerabilities. And that's something that our team does when they're published. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to push out, what looks like hopefully a small polished security advisory that gives people the information they need to know to prioritize patching and understand their risk.
Yeah, we had a conversation about patching earlier. We can talk about that a little later. Now, the one thing our audience and customers may not know, but access to the security incident response team. So if you're under attack, we always talk about call SIRT. That's included in their support contract, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, yeah. So any customer can phone into support, mention that they are under attack or at risk of attack or recently suffered an attack. And that will fire off our ESRP process, the emergency security response process. It's more than any customer who has a service contract. We will help any customer who phones up. Nice. So if your support contract has lapsed, but you come under attack, you phone up, you will get help just like any other customer. And we will, like I say, do our best to stop the bleeding for you.
So when a call comes in, what's the typical process? Like, does somebody instantly like triage it and then maybe assign it out to a group, or it's sort of everybody sort of sees it come in and they're like, oh, I'll grab this one because I know about DDoS or whatever?
So our aim is to identify those SRs, those cases from customers as early as possible. So the TSC teams, that's the guys who are usually frontline on the phones, taking phone calls from customers. They're trained to try and identify a customer who's under attack, even if the customer doesn't explicitly say those words. So they're trained to look for other markers about that SR. They can phone in to, like I say, to our support line, speak to a TSC. The TSC will flag the SR and will immediately hand it off to one of our trained security specialists, right? So one of the 80, 90 people we have worldwide. Our aim for every ESRP incident is that handoff is warm. So the customer should never be sitting listening to dead air, right? They should always be talking to a human who understands the urgency and understands the pressure the customer is probably under and will help them as soon as possible.
Nice. So, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
On the intake process, I know like when I was a customer and I had a feature problem on the big IP, I got to the point where I had enough tribal knowledge that I could submit, and I said, okay, I know I need to provide quick views. I know I need to provide my logs. I know that if I have any TCP dumps, that would be helpful to describe the information and give as much detail up front as possible. Not that it like moved my case to the front of the line, but as far as the round trip times to get the support team the information they needed to really address the case was reduced. And so, on that end, is there, like a standard package that you guys are looking for information, especially from people who know exactly what the problem is, they just don't know how to attack it?
Yeah, so here's an interesting thing. So a QK view is always helpful, right? If you can get one. A lot of times when a customer's under attack, the box is under such load that they can't get a QK view. So we actually find a lot of the time in an ESRP incident, we are working live with the customer's technical team. So we'll be on a WebEx, Zoom meeting, whatever, some kind of video conference, teleconference meeting with the customer. And more often, we're interested in looking at what's happening right now than what's happening in a snapshot of data.
Yeah.
It's like I say, it's always helpful to get a QK view because you can offline look at the configuration that's in place on the box, or in parallel to what's going on the call, look at the configuration on the box. And I should add that in an ESRP incident, the customer is going to be usually dealing with a team right off the bat. So they will usually be dealing with an NSE security specialist who will be on the phone with them. But they've also got the backup of a security engineer or senior security engineer like myself, either on the phone with them or in the background working with the security specialist. So we're not just single tasking on this, right? We're coming at it in as many directions as we can. So if the specialist is on the phone with the customer working through the config or looking at what's happening live on the box, the security engineer can be looking at the snapshot of what was happening a half hour ago if we get a QK view. If we don't get a QK view, we're often on the conference with the specialist and the customer, and we'll spin up whatever resources we need to in F5 to help the customer. Outside of the support organization, we interface into the account teams. So we're usually notifying the account team right when that incident happens, or very soon after, because the account teams not only have a relationship with the customer, but often the SEs have knowledge of the environment, right, and knowledge of the config and what the customer is trying to achieve that they might not necessarily express, that can really help us figure out what the best way to resolve, to mitigate an attack is.
I think that's an interesting point, because sometimes, having an objective party and, the SEs or SAs being objective in this context, when you're in the throes of an attack or outage or whatever, your clarity may not be the best, and especially if you've got directors and vice presidents standing over you while get it fixed. And so having that person who does have intimate knowledge of that environment that can kind of seed some information both ways, both to the customer to remind them that, hey, here's what is available to you in something that you could try, but also it's like, no, I know that this is kind of what is in your environment, and but then also feeding data back to your team as well. So I think that's a good liaison relationship in an attack scenario.
we've also used that relationship to get trial licenses. So take IP intelligence, which is really useful in a lot of situations in nailing the low-hanging fruit, right? The attack traffic that is almost certainly malicious traffic that you just want to drop at the earliest. And a lot of customers don't have IP intelligence licenses, but we can get a trial license cut via the account teams and delivered to the customer, often within a half hour, an hour of the customer calling in. So we can spin someone up on IPI really fast in that trial license period to stop the bleeding, to stop the attack traffic, and demonstrate the benefits of that feature. Right. And then once we've mitigated that attack, the account team can go in and do their thing for the long-term mitigation. So like you say, it also helps that the account teams can sometimes be the guys who are talking to the CIOs and the CISOs at the customers, while we are then free to deal with the technical guys, the feet on the ground, who are the people who are actually in a position to solve the problem,
right?
Rather than explain the ins and outs of what's going on to someone who may or may not be as technical.
Right.
Yeah. Panic often gives bad answers. So speaking of attacks, one of the things I know this because we work together on the 90-second program is now starting to kind of build up some statistics, metrics on the types of attacks that SIRT is seeing from our customers. And we did one last summer, the top SIRT threats for summer 2019, and it was credential stuffing. So we recently did one, the spring 2020 edition. We're going to bring up a little image. So what's kind of changed between the credential stuffing then and what we see on our screen now? I see brute force, which, credential stuffing is a type of brute force, but looks like that volumetric is starting to rear its ugly head again, huh?
Yeah. So what we saw in 2019 was that credential stuffing was by far the predominant kind of attack that our customers were coming under, which, like you say, is a kind of brute force. And volumetric was a much smaller percentage. And we figured that volumetric had probably gone out of fashion because just filling a pipe is getting much more difficult and much more expensive. Right. You need, the pipes that customers have coming into their data centers or their co-locations or the cloud are that much bigger. You need to rent that much bigger a botnet to try and fill it with SINs. And even if you can fill it with SINs, SIN cookies will take care of most of that kind of problem. You're going to have to fill the entire pipe before you take down the backend system. So we figured, well, they've given up on that, right? And we're just going to crack accounts, and we will directly get to the juicy information.
Yep, access.
And exactly. And then 2020 rolled around, and this weird thing happened. The volumetric DOS attacks came back. We're not seeing so much in the way of SIN floods, low value. This isn't someone turning on low orbit ion cannon and pointing it at a server. We saw more complex volumetric denial of service attacks, right? So they're attacking specific HTTP infrastructure to overwhelm a backend server with long-running requests. We've also seen, we saw this, it was maybe starting at the back end of 2019, if I think anecdotally about it, but it shows up in the numbers for spring 2020. Volumetric attacks against DNS, which, is all in the news recently because of the NXNS attacks. But it started before that with things like DNS water torture. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be becoming more popular. That's not to say that brute force has gone away, right? It's still 38% of that pie chart.
Yeah, we'll go to the.
It's still really popular.
Yeah, you can see the actual side-by-side on here. What about APIs? Are you seeing APIs as targets?
So brute force, at one point, what we saw was like HTTP form-based auth, right? And yeah, recently we've been seeing a lot of brute force against APIs. And that's not necessarily usernames and passwords. That's brute forcing other things for validity, which is an interesting trend and actually quite tricky to protect against. APIs expect automated requests. That's if they're machine-to-machine APIs. That's what they're expecting. So you can't just go, well, I'll drop everything that isn't human traffic, right? Because you've got to determine the good bot traffic from the bad bot traffic. So it's a much trickier prospect.
You brought up the HTTP brute force, and you recently did a series on DevCentral, the HTTP brute force mitigation playbook. Is that right? It's like a series.
Yeah, so it's a 6-chapter, 7-chapter.
With the appendix.
Doesn't really count. On mitigating brute force attacks with all of the F5 products. I say all of the F5 products, all of the F5 big IP products. This doesn't cover any of our more recent acquisitions. So we wanted to look at this from more than just the big IP ASM or advanced WAF perspective, right? That everybody knows, or everybody who's worked with ASM or advanced WAF knows that it has brute force protection built in. But that doesn't mean you can't use the other products to protect against brute force. AVR, for example, we have a whole chapter on visibility. So using AVR and LTM for visibility,
you can't see, right?
Exactly, and visibility is really important. The ESRP incidents that go the smoothest are the ones where we have the most visibility into what's going on.
Go figure on that.
Yeah, it sounds obvious, but there's a stark difference between people who don't know what's going through the network and people who know really well what's going through the network and just need to know how to stop it going through the network. So yeah, we covered LTM for visibility. We cover LTM for mitigation with iRules. iRules are super powerful, and we use those more than you might think. As well as ASM.
iRules to mitigate instances. That might be a pretty, I'm not going to say easy fix, but once you can get something together in a few lines of code and patch it on there, everything starts to work a little better, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you can. So we've done this 2 ways, usually one of 2 ways. Either you need to know something about the traffic that is fairly unique to the attack, and then you can write a simple iRule to drop it. Right? The iRule, it can be as simple as a few lines of code and just drop an attack on the floor.
Yeah.
Or you need something that you can count, right? So requests per IP address over a certain span of time. You can use the tables command in iRules to do that kind of counting. And then once they breach the threshold, start dropping traffic from IP addresses. You're kind of rewriting functionality that's in ASM in an iRule. But for a customer who doesn't have ASM right now, that's invaluable.
Yeah.
Or even for a customer who, this is going to sound crazy. As soon as I say it, it'll sound crazy. I've known customers who will need a signed off change control to make a change to the ASM config, but will quite happily drop an iRule on the virtual server.
Yeah, that actually doesn't surprise me that much because of the division of roles and responsibilities. Because, typically network teams will have control of all LTM functionality, and then you might have a security group that's responsible for, ASM policy. And so, because of division of labor and all the different directors protecting their fiefdom and, CYA type stuff, that the security team's happy to let them throw in an iRule if the box blows up while they thoroughly vet and test stuff in a lab before they make a policy change.
Yeah, which, like you say, it's totally understandable. And the nice thing is that as part of the ESRP process, we might give you that iRule that will mitigate the attack, right now. But we'll still provide you with the advice on how you should do this in ASM or how you could do this in advanced WAF later, so that their security teams can then look at it when the pressure is off, when the alarm bells aren't ringing and the building isn't on fire. They can go, okay, so this is what we should do in our ASM policy, that we can test it, we can make sure it works, and then we can deploy it into production. And long term, have a much better strategy.
And it looks like we got a question from one of our viewers. Can you report these through AVR, even if no subs to the ASM, AFM module? So I'm
subscriptions, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Oh, subscription. Right. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. So, AVR comes along with basically every big IP at this point.
Yep.
You don't necessarily get the visibility into everything. So you might not have all of the detail, right? Without ASM doing more layer 7 parsing, or AFM, which has the sort of layer 4 denial of service stuff. But AVR can still get you great visibility into breaking down what traffic is going where and from where. And just that simple breakdown of, what's going where and who's it coming from can be invaluable into figuring out a strategy to, we see geolocation blocking used a lot in emergency incidents, right? A company probably doesn't want to drop, let's say, traffic from everywhere but the geography that they're in, because they'll have customers all around the world. But in an emergency incident, they can say, well, you know what, if 98% of our current traffic is coming from geography X, I won't point any fingers, but geography X,
hostile nation location.
Yeah, then we're okay right now with dropping that traffic, and AVR can give you that kind of visibility.
Yeah, and also, like you said earlier, you can use iRules even if you're not going to do blocking. You can use iRules to track on any particular pattern you're specifically looking for, and then feed that through AVR.
Yep, and that's better than something we see occasionally, which is iRules logging everything locally, right, into varlog LTM. It's a really bad idea.
I'll give an example of that. Actually, when I was a customer, I was doing logging to local system, and the IO bottleneck, the difference between, I was doing GTM resolution logging, and with logging on, I could get to 2,500 requests per second. When I turned off logging, I was at 26,000 requests per second. So, that's an entire order of magnitude that I was blocking on just, IO blocking.
Oh yeah. More than once I've had to tell people that the reason the denial of service was successful was the amount that their iRules were logging into varlog LTM, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what HSL is for. So for the iRule, or for those that aren't as familiar with iRules, rather than logging to your local system, use high-speed logging. That takes it with an optimized system for iRules specifically. Well, actually, it's more than iRules, but within iRules, taking high-speed logging off box. And there's an entire HSL command suite for iRules, and then it uses your log publishers and log destinations that are built into the LTM config.
Yeah.
Speaking of big IP, so what is, maybe we've talked about this before, maybe not the most common big IP mistakes, but what would be the best advice that you would give customers in terms of, because I mentioned at the top, you're protecting not only the services that are behind the big IP, but big IPs themselves are attack targets, and they can get hit with various nasties out there. So what would be a top recommendation in terms of the big IP you would suggest to our customers?
Yeah, so I wrote an article recently on DevCentral about protecting your networks from malware predominantly using a big IP. But I talk at length. I forget how many times I snuck this into the document, but basically, don't put the management port of your big IP on the internet. Right? Don't expose SSH and HTTPS. Occasionally, customers will tell me that they really have to, and I would suggest there are better ways to do your remote admin than exposing it to the internet, even with an ACL, locking it down to IP addresses. So the self IP port allow list, make sure it's allow none if the self IP is sitting on the internet. Don't put the management port on the internet. Use strong passwords. Like that's, if we see something get popped, and this isn't specific to F5 or F5 products, this is just in general, 95% of the time, probably 98% of the time, it was a weak administrative password.
Yeah. And that's really good advice for any appliance device from any vendor that's out there, is just ensuring that that management's not exposed, and if it must, then lock it down as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, use VPNs to get into your administrative domain if you need to get in, like outside of VPNing into your corporate infrastructure.
Even if you don't have APM Lite enables like 10 concurrent connections. And so from an administrative standpoint, you can enable APM to allow you to connect to your, your, not necessarily the management interface, but the management application. So you would come through your TMM interfaces to do it. But there's a little localhost iRules hook that allows you to do that with no management interface connection at all.
Much better way of doing it.
If you have to do it that way, if you don't have a backend, infrastructure for management, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
So then, coming up, what are some of the things you guys, might be working on? I know we discussed potentially putting together, based on the types of attacks you guys see, get, and then mitigate. I know we talked about potentially publishing something that sort of lists out or describes the various mitigation techniques that SIRT uses to then defend against these kinds of particular attacks.
Yeah, so we are constantly documenting stuff internally and on Ask F5. So I think annually, probably, we publish a good 350 security advisories. I mean, they cover a broad range of things, right? But I'm told those account for about 10% of all of the hits on Ask F5, which is pretty good. We went through a project fairly recently to document as many attack types as we could and mitigation strategies for them. All of those are on Ask F5. Going forwards, we want to write more things like the brute force playbook on DevCentral. It's a really nice avenue for us to push more free-form information out to the customer base. So hopefully you can look out for more stuff like that coming from us.
I love to read that stuff. Yeah, it helps me build out my, breadth of knowledge for sure.
And just
I don't go real deep in the area of security. That's more, John's focal area on our team and his background and expertise. But I do like to stay, aware generally of what's going on, and those are really helpful for me.
And you guys typically see, I got one more image to share, but if you want to pull it up, this one that we were talking about this morning, it's kind of interesting. You guys also, I imagine, see a bunch of older threats, like old school kinds of attacks that still haven't been maybe patched or taken care of some years later. Is that right?
Yeah. So actually, this gives me an opportunity to talk about two things. But you're right that the latest and greatest CVE, or even the CVSS 10, the highest severity CVE that was released yesterday, aren't typically the things being weaponized on the internet, right? People are still attacking CVEs from 2012. And if they're not attacking them, they're scanning for them, right? There was a top 10 list published recently by the US SIRT, and those kind of things, 2012, 2015, 2016 CVEs, we see all the time. Stuff that you would think would be long since dead and buried, right? People are trying to exploit, like shell shock, for example. Which reminds me of something, which is F5 threat campaigns. So that's not from the F5 SIRT. So I don't want to take credit for what our threat research guys do in PD. But they produce these threat campaigns that are basically a specific set of advanced WAF rules, signatures, that apply to things they are seeing actively exploited, right, on the internet right now. So they're a zero false positive model signature set that should be zero risk to apply to an advanced WAF policy. And you'd be amazed what ends up in the threat campaigns that you might not expect to see, right? Because it's not the latest and greatest. Sometimes it is the latest and greatest, you know, a new, let's go with like WordPress or Drupal, CVE comes out and everybody's hitting that. So that ends up in the threat campaigns. But a lot of the times what cycles in and out of those threat campaigns is the older stuff, the stuff that people have forgotten to patch or didn't get around to patching because they were busy patching all of the CVSS 10 stuff in their infrastructure, right?
Right. We talked about that, right? That a lot of times you get a CVSS 10, but there may be a 2014 that's a 6 or 7. And when it comes down to it, as far as business risk, it's this, 2014 6 and 7 that you got to take care of well before last week's 10.
Yeah. I mean, the CVSS score tells you how bad the vulnerability is, but not in your environment, right? So a CVSS 10 on a system that's relatively hardened and sitting in a largely inaccessible location is not as bad as a CVSS 6.4, say, that's sitting on a public web server facing the internet. CVSS has a mechanism for dealing with that, which is the environmental score that I probably don't want to get into right now. But if people are patching, right? Sorry?
Hey, watch the video, right?
Yeah. If people are patching the 10s because it's a 10 and because it's a critical, which we see all of the time, and forgetting the lower severity stuff that's facing the internet, they're doing themselves a disservice.
Well, and that's the low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, that's the stuff that's easy to exploit. So those are the ones that, and you come back to Peter, what you said at the very beginning of the show when we kicked off, your attitude and position towards threat and risk and the difference. And that 10 is a bigger threat, but it's not a bigger risk in that scenario.
Hey, can you pull up this last chart? I just want to show something. This is something that F5 Labs.
You got to share your screen. You knocked your screen off.
Oh, I knocked my screen. Okay, sorry.
Technology failure.
Yeah, that's me. Share. And then application. There we go. Share. Did it take?
There you go.
There we go. So this is something F5 Labs put together, and it shows when the vulnerability was released. So that's all the blue stuff, 2005, 13 through 2019. But then the attack campaigns that occurred during 2019, they're all going back to these vulnerabilities that were, released back in the mid-teens, which I thought was just amazingly fascinating.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. The stuff that is still exploitable out there. That it's so hard to maintain visibility of everything that's in your environment. It's understandable that stuff gets forgotten. Either doesn't get patched because it's not seen as important, or doesn't get patched because someone forgot it existed. It was a dark project that nobody knew about. All of those are valid reasons and ways that people are out there, shell shocks there and from 2014, right? Still being exploited.
There's certain aspects of the new container world that I think are still black boxes and not understood and secure risk. But one of the things I really like about that is the immutability of your containers that you're sending. Is like you build and go. And so, if you're keeping that aspect of it patched, well, then the machine itself is, when that's it, you fix the code, push, and then it's more instantaneous, and it's a little bit easier to manage from a single source of truth, I think. So that aspect of the new container era, I like, but I'm still a little iffy on the rest of it.
Oh yeah, there are aspects of containerization that terrify me. That people are just downloading and running untrusted code because, hey, this container says it does the thing I need it to. Right. If you aren't auditing that stuff, if you build out a huge microservices-based system that's got all of these containers floating around and nobody ever audited them, you've no idea what your risk landscape looks like. But like you say, for fixing stuff, then you can pave. You fix it, and your entire infrastructure is essentially nuked and paved with the fixed version. That's brilliant. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, my friend. So you're out in the UK. I know it's going on dark 30 by you as the sun goes down. So we really appreciate your time, Aaron. It's always fun chatting with you. I'm very fortunate to have a little meeting with you every other week to kind of talk about this stuff amongst ourselves. So we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Anytime.
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it.
And the folks can find SIRT just f5.com/SIRT. And I know Leslie put the number in.
Yep, I can flash that back up real quick. Maybe if I can find it. There it is.
There it is. Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
All right. Oh, maybe we got one more question here.
Here we go. You sound UK-based, Aaron. Oh, we got that one first. Yeah, go with that one. Yep. What would be your recommendations on exposing ports like SSH, HTTP over the internet directly? I think you touched on that a little bit. Asking because sometimes the requirement comes to expose it, and we all know that's insecure. I think we kind of talked about it, right? Locking it down at the very minimum.
Yeah,
ACL.
I mean, if you need to, at the very minimum, really ACL it down to specific source ranges. The SSH and HTTP are at least TCP and stateful, right? So it's not easy to just spoof the source IP addresses and waltz right through an ACL like it is with UDP traffic.
Which even that is about to change with Quick, right? So with HTTP flying over to Quick and being UDP based, yes.
Luckily, we don't support Quick for the management port yet.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, my recommendation would always be don't do it, and look at something like APM Lite for accessing your management system. But if you absolutely have to, lock it down to specific source ranges, use strong passwords, mandate password expiry, and implement the same kind of password strategy that you do in the rest of your corporate environment. I won't get into that whole argument about password expiry versus password complexity and passphrases, because everybody has their own opinions.
Yeah. And then we got one for Marcus before we let you run.
Yep. Recognize the dialect. Heard a lot of chat about HTTP desync lately, using F5 to cover that right now, as the back end is only running IIS 7 and no HTTP 2.
Yeah, so the HTTP desync attacks were a big thing. I say a big thing, a blackout last year. And we do have a couple of security advisories about that up, or at least one. If you are, the reality is that with a relatively well-written commodity web server, your exposure is probably limited. Where we see this be a bigger problem is with custom rolled backend apps, backend web servers, or more obscure web servers. So IIS 7, you're probably okay. But the reality is that there will probably always be a hole that you can drive something through. And that hole is wherever the different systems in line that are passing HTTP disagree with how to pass the HTTP. So there's no one-size-fits-all advice. You are pretty safe using Big IP because it doesn't do a lot of HTTP parsing out of the box, right? Our HTTP parser is designed to be quite permissive, but the more things you pass out using iRules or local traffic policies, the more places you need to test and be aware and make sure that your web server behaves the same as your Big IP. ASM is also great to, or advanced WAF to throw on there because that does a lot of RFC compliancy checks and will flag up a lot of the ways that someone will try and, trick the different systems into behaving differently. So that would be my general advice.
Sweet.
All righty. So yeah, thank you absolutely for hanging out with us today and for hanging off for 2 more questions there. And we'll do a second goodbye now. So
we'll probably have you back in the fall to talk about how attacks are shaping up for the end of 2020. How's that?
Absolutely. Happy to be here anytime.
All right. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right.
Aaron's fantastic.
Yeah, that was good. All right. So what's next on tap, Peter? What do we got?
I think you got I'm now blanking on the tool you wanted to share.
Yeah. We're going to talk about Campfire. Last week.
There we go. Campfire. I was thinking marshmallows. Yeah. Seriously, roasted marshmallows were in my head for some reason. I just couldn't come out with Campfire though.
Yeah, actually we did a campfire out in the backyard this last weekend, and somebody had shared on Facebook you take instead of building your s'mores like you normally do with the graham cracker crust and the marshmallow, and you put a little piece of chocolate, to take a sugar cone, and then you take the mini marshmallows and chocolate chips and butterscotch chips, and you just kind of fill up your sugar cone with that, wrap it in foil, and just kind of sit it in the coals for a little bit.
And you tried that? So
we tried that, and what didn't absolutely burn tasted great. But so I got to figure out, maybe I'll just put them on a grill kind of above the fire instead of right down there in the coals.
And they got marshmallows now that are already like filled with chocolate, almost like a jelly donut, and you can then put that on, and then you don't need the extra chocolate bar. But anytime these 2 kinds of different foods sort of try to come together for something special, I don't know, unless it's a fluffernutter or something.
Yeah. The chocolate already inside my marshmallows, it seems like cheating. Yeah. So all right. Well, we're gonna get into Campfire. So again, I showed this last week when I tried to do my demo, but it blew up. But Campfire, the preferred mechanism for turning logs into flames, and so that's how this got its name, is because we're taking the concept of taking iRules and getting log data out of that. So if you look at how everybody has traditionally debugged iRules from either a data or performance perspective, it's with the timing command for performance, and you can do that by event, or you do log statements for the data side, and you log to local system or you log off box, but you do a lot of logging to try and debug what you're doing. And what the product development team delivered a few years ago, actually, it's November of 2017, so almost 3 years ago, is the ability to do tracing and performance profiling. And so Jibin Han from product development has a 3-part article series on DevCentral. If you go look at iRule execution tracing and performance profiling, kind of goes into the nitty gritty of the problem of how we used to have to debug iRules. It's very rudimentary and not exactly 100% accurate. You can get down to within an HTTP event, you can say, okay, well, that HTTP event is taking a long time to execute, so my problem is there. But it doesn't really get down into the nitty gritty of where within the event you're having problems. And so, he goes through kind of the model here of how iRules work. And you go from, the traffic management microkernel. And when you enter an event, it goes into this, Tickle virtual machine. And then you have, an entry within the rule itself. And then you go down into the bytecode. And for those who aren't familiar with how iRules work, they are TCL based, and everything is compiled down into bytecode. And I wrote an article a while ago where you could, if you're just using the Tickle shell on Big IP or on your own Mac, you can kind of look at the non-iRules specific commands within TCL, and you can build out with this Tickle unsupported disassemble. You can take your iRules and disassemble them down into bytecode and look at actually what's happening on the stack. And so for an expression of 3 times 4, you can see everything that the iRule or the rule virtual machine is doing to achieve that expression. And then if you look at it interpreted through using brackets around that, you can see that there's quite a few less things happening on the stack when you wrap your expressions in curly brackets. And when you do a timing event on the difference between those, you can see that you save quite a bit per iteration of time in how things are cycled. So this kind of stuff is valuable for debugging, but you could never do this in iRules. And now, since late 2017, that's been in the product. The problem is nobody really knew how to use it. So Jibbin goes through in part 2 through this event of how to actually build a rule profiler for whatever events that you want to add. And you can do filters for particular events, filters for particular rules, and then you can put masks on there as well. And he goes into all the details of that. And so, it's pretty powerful stuff if you know what to do with it. So it generates lots of log data. And I'll just kind of show you an example here. And maybe that's too small, but you can see all these individual log statements that are going, tells you kind of, what is happening on the stack, kind of like I showed you how all those different things go through. So on the bytecode, you can see, storing the scalar, what it's pushing and popping onto the stack. There's the actual command that was iterated, and then it gives you that, with timestamps, and then also you have your flow key of what connection that belongs to. And so that's pretty powerful stuff in a log, but it doesn't really help you from a visualization standpoint. And that's where this Campfire app comes in. And this is the very rudimentary. I'm going to clean this up to make it publicly available because there's some stuff I have to clean out with some internal data. And so this will look different when we get there, but the functionality won't change. And so I have a sample file for us to look at. And then, so if you wanted to just log everything, then post capture, you can come in here and filter by events or iRules or a particular flow key, and then whatever you want to filter. But you can also pre-filter, and that's where you do it in the config, where right here, this is where you do your pre-filtering. And so by pre-filtering, if you're looking for a very specific thing, that obviously saves you compute cycles on your computer. And so, if you just generally want to look at all the iRules, you don't need to have as many filters. You can just say carte blanche, give me everything. But if you do that, then you can come in here and kind of look at individual iRules. We're just going to accept the bank, and I already have that file that we're looking at here. This is the one we're going to load into Campfire. And so this will generate a flame graph, and the flame graph part is actually written in Perl. It's available out on GitHub. So if you just want to look at the flame graph generator itself, not packaged within this application, you can go out there and get on GitHub, and I'll share details for that. But this is where you can just come in here and you can say that you can look at what takes longest, and from a horizontal perspective, you're looking at how many compute is in each individual little area. So if you're looking at the rule itself, this is rule number 1, and it's got 572 samples were looked at, and then you can come out actually into the bytecode, and so you can look at the stack was invoked there, and so all the different little things that were happening within the rule VM within the Tickle virtual machine, and then you get down to the actual log statement, and so it just it gives you the ability. One of the things that's kind of challenging, and I'm working on seeing if I can clean it up a little bit, is if you have something that's ridiculously light, it might not show up in a way that you can select it, so that you won't get a true visual here of everything that got logged in. And the way to work with that is to increase the amount of filtering you're doing so that you can find everything. And then, of course, once you're in here, once you're looking through your different stacks and commands, then you can see, if is it really my log statement within this HTTP event that's killing me, or is it that I'm running through a for loop to, delay the iRule for 150 seconds or whatever, and you'll be able to track that stuff down.
So keeping with the theme of the day, can this or will this also help them either identify threats or mitigate risks?
I don't think so at this level, because really this is you're looking at the performance of how you've coded your iRules, yeah. Right. And so one of the things that I'm gonna write this up as I build it, and so I'll take a step past Gibbons' articles to way back. Lori McVitie had an article, and she released a dice rolling application. She's a huge gamer, and she released an iRule that's a dice roller, and it allows you to say how many dice and the sides of the dice, and then it gives you a score out of that. And so when she released that, I was like, I think I can make that a little more efficient. And so my first attempt to make it more efficient by pulling out some variables actually made it way worse. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to her iRule, my unoptimized attempt to optimize it, my optimized attempt to optimize it, and then we had another person who took up my challenge to optimize even my version. And so I'm going to look at all 4 of those from a timing perspective, but then I'm going to throw them in the flame graph as well, so we can kind of look and see from a bytecode stack perspective why one versus the other was so much slower.
Fascinating.
And so I'll dig more into the details in the future. But anyway, I wanted to walk through and just let people know that, and really all this came from our agility live stream from a couple weeks ago. Somebody was asking about, hey, are you able to trace iRules? And I said, well, actually, yeah, somebody built that, and I totally forgot to clean it up and make it available to the public. So now we're going to do that. And,
nice. I might have been thinking, don't we have that, not an iRule parser, but a iRule kind of looking at it to make sure there's no like funny syntax in it that ends up like, DDoSing itself or getting in infinite loops or things like that? I thought there was. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing anything like that, but certainly the syntax checker that's built in will catch that if you have poor syntax.
Yeah, but that's probably it.
Yep. Well, sir, we are up on time. We got just about, 30 seconds left.
Thanks for having me. This was fantastically fun. I loved it.
It was good. I'm glad that you were able to join me today, so everybody didn't have to hear me drone on by myself.
John will be back next week.
Yeah.
I'll be back behind the keyboard.
Yep. So, hey, everyone that's joined us today, thank you so much for hanging out with us, for getting to hear about the great things that F5 SIRT is doing to help you, the customer, because it really is a great service. If you're not taking advantage of that, please do. And we thank Aaron for your time joining us. Peter, thank you for joining me today in John's absence.
Anytime.
And yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching.